this is honestly one of the most popular system design question that is asked in front-end interviews in both bigger and smaller companies as well. So the interviewer will ask you to design a scalable autocomplete or type-ahead component, and this is how it should look like. So let's say if I go on and search BA, you can see there was a loading indicator and then we got all of these search results. And I'm not going to use my mouse. If I press down key, you can see we have the keyboard navigation as well over here. And also whatever is written inside of the input box is being highlighted in these search results. If I say BAN, yep, this is highlighted over here. And also let me show you one more thing. If I let's say type BA again, you can see there was no loading indicators because we are caching all of these values so that we can quickly access them whenever we want. If I say BAN again, you can see both of them were searched before, right? So we are caching them in our local storage or wherever you want to cache them. And this also supports dynamic data that is from an API and as well as static data from your local. And this might look simple to a lot of you, but it consists of a lot of things like keyboard navigation, highlighting the text, adding custom loader, supporting static as well as dynamic data, and much more. So first we will discuss the requirements, then the high level design, the low level design, and then the optimizations to make it even more performant. So first of all, we're going to discuss the functional as well as non-functional requirements. So functional requirements are those which are absolutely necessary for the component to work, and non-functional requirements are good to have and in most of the cases enhances the experience of the user. So when it comes to functional requirements, obviously first of all we're going to have real-time suggestions, right? As the user types into the input box, they should get the real-time suggestions. It should support dynamic and static data. That is, dynamic data could be coming from an API and static data could be locally provided from your system. Debouncing, this is very important. So whenever user types into the input box, we have to make sure that we are not calling the API in every single stroke. We are optimizing the API call and only calling it whenever user stops from some millisecond. I'll explain you the concept of debouncing as well in this video. Keyboard navigation, as I already showed you, the ability to navigate through the keyboard, because in a lot of cases users might not be using their mouse. Highlighted match, again very important to see how we came up with that result, right? So we should show that where in this particular result we have that highlighted match. It should be customizable. We're gonna provide it props like on change, on blur, on focus, things like this, right, to make it customizable, and a custom loading indicator as well. And when it comes to non-functional requirement, obviously we have to make sure the performance is really good by implementing things like debouncing and caching. Responsiveness, yes, it should be responsive in all of the screen sizes. Security, we have to make sure that no one is able to do cross-site scripting attacks by implementing the necessary features. Caching, I've already showed you how caching works to make our app performant. Accessibility, to make it more accessible to the people who are, visually impaired, or people who are using probably screen readers or like, for example, keyboard navigation, right? That is also a form of accessibility. And compatibility, that it should be compatible in all of the types of browsers. Now next, let's discuss the high-level design of this component. And high-level design basically means we're not worrying about how the data is going to look like or how the components are going to look like. This is more of the high-level architecture of the app and how it will function. So obviously we will get an input from the user and then we will debounce that input to make sure our app is performant. And now in this case, we're going to check, is the cache available for that particular query? Like for example, we entered that BA query, right? So if the cache is available, we're going to use the cached results and then we're going to render the results on our screen. But if the cache is not available, we're going to make the API call or use the static data if available. And when we will get the API response, we will check, is the API response is successful? Yes. Then we're going to update our cache first and then we're going to render the suggestions. If it's not successful, then we're going to obviously display the error, right? But if it's successful, we're going to again render the suggestions and then in the end highlight all of the matches. So you have to make sure that you create such a similar flow diagram in your interviews as well to explain the interviewer, and this is a very good practice in system design interviews. Now next comes low level design or LLD, which basically means that we're going to discuss how the data will look like inside of our app, what are all the props that we're going to be supplying to our component. So generally in system design interviews, you can either create like boxes, similar boxes, and you can define probably interfaces, TypeScript interface or types to show what a particular component will take, all of the types. But in this case, you can either do this or I can go on and create a whole app in front of you as well, so that you're gonna get an idea on what are all the different props our app takes, and then you can, according to yourself, frame an LLD, which is just basically, text that you explain to the interviewer that, yeah, if let's say we have an autocomplete component, it's gonna take things like placeholder, custom loader, on select what happens, on change what happens, on focus what happens. So let's see. Let's go on and try to build this component using React.js. Alright, so I've opened VS Code over here, and let's quickly go on and initialize a new React app. So I'm gonna say npm create wheat at latest. And in a lot of front-end system design videos, I've seen people do not go on and code the app. They would just explain you HLD, LLD, and high-level LLD as well, and then just optimization, and they'll be done with it. But here in this channel, I'm gonna show you how you can go on and create it end-to-end by using code. So it's gonna ask us our project name. I'm gonna say dot to create it inside of this Autosuggestion component folder. I'm gonna choose React and JavaScript. Awesome. So we have a brand new React app over here. Let's delete the things that we don't need, like assets, everything inside of app.css, everything inside of index.css, and I'll just say npm install to install all of the dependencies that are inside of this package.json file. And also, if you're interested to see more such videos like this, to practice more such interview questions along with system design questions, I have a complete front-end interview preparation course. So make sure you click the link in the description down below and check out this course. This is the only thing that you will ever need to prepare for your front-end interviews. And not only this, I've covered every single topic of React.js, like React Router DOM, Redux, all of the hooks, class-based component, function-based component React, even the performance optimization, which is asked from senior developers a lot, tons of machine coding questions as well, and obviously in-depth interview preparation course on JavaScript as well. So all of this you get in one single course. So click the link in the description down below, because right now we're having the biggest sale of the year for a very limited time. So don't forget to check it out. Or you can also scan this QR code on your screen to go directly to the course page. And meanwhile, I'm gonna go to app.jsx. I'm gonna remove this, all of these things. I'm not gonna need any of those. And inside of the return, I'm gonna have a div which simply says subscribe to Roadside Coder, which you should if you haven't yet. Alright, there we go. Let's go on and run our app. So I'm going to say npm run dev. There we go. Awesome. So first of all, let's plan our app. So inside this dev, I'm going to just put a h1 tag. And then below this, I'm going to render our autocomplete component. So our component, let's first just go on and create all of the files. So I'm going to create a components folder, and I'll create a hooks folder over here as well. Inside of the components, I'm gonna have autocomplete.jsx, a file for our suggestions component, which will render all of our suggestion, all the search results. So suggestions list.jsx, and inside of our hooks folder, I'm gonna create a new file for use cache.jsx. For handling all of the cache logic, we're gonna create a custom hook. So first of all, inside of the autocomplete.jsx, I'm gonna say rafce autocomplete, and if you don't know how I did this rafce, there's an extension called ES7 plus React Redux React Native snippets. So you can install this extension, and you can also generate boilerplate code like that. So okay, let's go on and import this component right over here. Okay, let's see. Looks good. So let's plan. What are all the props that we will be sending this autocomplete component? So first of all, obviously, since this is going to be an input, I'm gonna say placeholder, and I'll send some placeholder. In this case, since we're creating an recipe searching search box, so I'll say enter recipe or whatever you want over here. I'm gonna have a fetch suggestion props, which will take an asynchronous function for fetching all of our search results. So let's say over here, I'll create const fetch suggestions for now. Let's keep it async. Let's take this and provide it right over here. Below this, as we're gonna be fetching all of the data from our API, our component does not know from where it is supposed to take the exact data, right? Like for example, in this case, I'm gonna be using this API over here, dummyjson.com/recipes/search. So if I say question mark and query equals, let's say MAR, which will give us some recipes related to margarita, I guess. So if you see the response over here, inside of this array, we have this name which contains the actual name of the recipe inside of which we are supposed to search, right? So how will our app know that? So this is what we are supposed to also tell our app. So below this, I'm gonna have a prop called data key or result key, whatever you want to call it, and I'm gonna say name. Then I'll have a custom loading prop, which will basically take a JSX over here. Let's say in this case, I'll say loading recipes, right? You can also, use something like Lottie to provide something like a spinner loader or something like that, right? I'm gonna have a onSelect, which will have the logic and determines what will happen when that particular option is selected, right? We're gonna perform some action. So I'll keep it empty for now. Let's just say response, and inside of it, I'll just simply do a console log. That's all. Apart from this, since it's going to be an input box, right? This can have multiple different things like on change, which I'll keep an empty function for now. It can be on blur, there can be on focus, and all of these will give us certain event from there. Or in case of on change, we can just take the the exact input from our component. And then in the end, we can also supply custom styles to style our input. Custom styles. Okay. Also, one more thing, as I mentioned, we also have to make it support the static data. If you're not gonna provide this fetch suggestions over here, I'm gonna give a static data prop, and you can also call it just data prop. And let's say we have this static data right here, and we provide it just like this. So it should also support this static data. For now, I'll just comment it out. I'm going to show you when we'll go on and implement this. So cool. Let's go on to our autocomplete component, and let's add all of these props right over here. So just like this. Now inside this, I'm going to create few states over here. Now what is a state? A state is in React something that contains our data. And when we use a hook called useState, it returns us two things: a variable to contain that data and a function to change that particular data. So in this case, I'll say input value and set input value. This will contain the value of our input that the user will, enter. And I'm going to import it from React. I'm going to have another state which will contain all of our suggestions, all of our fetched suggestions, and we're going to have states for our loading and the error message. Great. Now inside this div, first of all, I'll just call this div class name of container. Inside of it, I'll have a input tag, which will be of type text. Styles will be custom styles. If you remember, we provided it a custom styles prop, right? So I'm just gonna pass it right on over here. I'm gonna provide it things like on blur, on focus that we already discussed. On select, we're gonna be implementing this, when we implement our suggestions list logic. We're gonna take this input value and I'm gonna give it to the value of this input. Obviously, we're gonna have a placeholder as well. If you remember, we gave this placeholder prop as well. So that's that. Then I'm gonna have a on change, which decides what's gonna happen when this input changes. So for this, I'll just create a function over here, const handle input change. I'm gonna take it and provide it to this on change over here. Now this handle input change obviously will take an event. This on change will send it an event to this handle input change, and simply I will set the input value to event.target.value. If I go back and see, okay, let's just refresh this. Yeah, hello, yeah, so this is working fine. Great. And also right after this, I'm gonna provide it to the on change as well. So I'll just say on change, and it's gonna send event.target.value. And if you remember over here, this on change was providing us with this input over here. Great. So this is actually optional. We're handling the data right over here itself, so we don't need to handle anything. But this on change is probably for something external that is you want to perform some action when this component changes. Now next thing that we're gonna do is create a get suggestions function, which will get all the suggestions, whether it is static data or a dynamic data, and it's gonna set it inside this suggestions state over here. So const get suggestions, and I'm gonna keep it asynchronous. Inside of this, I'll first of all set the error to null, and I'm gonna set the loading to true. So loading has started. After that, inside of the try catch block, I'm gonna make our API call. So I'll say let result. I'm gonna store all of the result of our API call inside this result variable over here. And now I'm gonna check if the static data is there. So if the user has provided the static data, I'm just gonna use that, else I'm gonna use the dynamic data. So if the static data is there, I'm gonna say result equals static data dot filter, and I'm gonna use JavaScript filter function over here to filter with respect to whatever the input value is provided to us. So I'll take each and every item and I'll say return item dot to lowercase. So I'll just convert it to lowercase first so that we can make the comparison. So to lowercase dot includes, so if this includes our input value, or actually I'm not just going to use this input value over here directly, I'm going to pass it through the params. So query, and I'll just say query dot to lowercase as well. All right, and this will give us inside of this result over here. Else if the static data is not provided, else if the fetch suggestions is provided, I'll say result equals await. Since this is going to be a function which is going to allow us to make an API call, so I'll say await, and simply just going to call this fetch suggestions over here with the query. And again, this fetch suggestions is provided to us from over here. So this fetch suggestions will take the query, and with respect to that, it will return the results from here. I'm going to come back to this, but after this, after we have the results populated, I'll say set suggestions to result. Great. And simply inside of our error, and I'll say set error failed to fetch suggestions and set suggestions to empty. And finally in the end, I'll say set loading to false. And this finally, as you already know, will run no matter if our code goes into try block or catch block. All right. Now after this, I'll have a use effect hook. And inside this use effect hook will only run when our input value changes. So I'll say input value. If this changes, only then this use effect hook will run. And simply inside this, I'll say if input value dot length is more than 1. That is, we're gonna only search something if user has typed more than more than one alphabet. So perform the action, else I'll say set suggestions to empty. So if the input value is more than 1, I'll call this get suggestions function that we made and just provide it with input value over here. Okay, this looks good enough. Let's just disable this, else it will just show this warning over here. Okay, cool. So let's quickly go on and write this function over here, which is going to be pretty straightforward. It can look like anything. We're just gonna fetch API over here, which I already showed you. We're gonna use this API, and it will take the query and it will do await fetch, whatever the response is. If the response is not okay, I'm gonna throw an error. If the response is okay, then I'm gonna return result dot recipes, and recipes is the one which contains all of our data, right? So from here, I'm gonna send the array of objects to this autocomplete component. Okay, this looks good. Let's just take the suggestions, and for now I'll just console log it over here. Looks like there's some error. Let's go to inspect. So it says input value is undefined. Okay, let's see. I think it's because we haven't given this input value an initial value. So let's just give this an empty string over here, and now the error should go away. Yep, fine. Let's just say BA. Okay, yep, you can see there must be an API call made, yep, in network over here, which contains query as BA, and we got the response over here. And inside the console, we can see we get this response right over here. Amazing. So now we have to take this response and render it right below this. Let's just first go on and add some bare minimum styles over here. So I'll just create a new file for styles.css. Let's just import this file over here. So I'll say import styles.css. Okay. Inside the styles.css, for our container, I'm going to give position to relative, some width, and some font family. If you want the width with respect to the parent component, you can give width to 100% probably. It completely depends on you. And inside of this, for our input tag, I'm going to give width to 100%, padding to 10 pixels, some box sizing, border box, some border radius, very bare minimum styles, basic stylings, right? So if I go back, yep, you can see nothing much fancy going on over here. And while we are at it, let's just add this loading and error over here as well. So right below this, I'll say if error is there, then I'm gonna add a div which will render the error, and let's just give this div a class name of error. Similarly, for our loading as well. I'll say loading, and inside this I'll say custom loading, right? So if the user provides this custom loading, then it will render that, else it will just render this loading right over here, right? And class name will be loading. Let's go on and add the styles for both of these. So inside of styles.css, I'm just simply going to say that padding 10 pixels, font size 14 pixels, and color this. If you want, you can, separate both of these error and loading with different colors. You know what, let's just do that right here. So for error, I'll say color to be red, right? And for loading, I'll just keep it this. Okay, let's go back, and if I remove this pan, yep, you can see, we can see that loading right there. Awesome. Now let's go on and build this suggestions list component. So I'll say RAFCE suggestions list, and I'll take this component, go back to our autocomplete, and right below this I'll render this component. Now as you already know, this is a list, right? So to render this list, I'm going to use UL or unordered list. So I'm going to wrap this whole component inside this UL, and actually I'll take this error and loading as well inside of it, and I'll add a condition over here. If the suggestions dot length is more than 0, only then render it, or there's a loading going on, or there's an error, only then we're gonna render this. And let's just take this inside of this one bracket, and I'll say and over here. Okay, yeah, this looks good. Okay, so what will this suggestions list take? And again, this is also the part of our low level design, as I already mentioned, mentioning all of these props and all the data that will be used inside of our app. So what are all the props that this will take? Obviously these suggestions. So suggestions, if you remember over here, we have this suggestions state, right? So that is what we will be using over here. Let's keep this empty by default. Apart from that, I'm gonna have a highlight, or you can call it an input value as well. I'm just gonna supply input value to this, but I'm calling this highlight because this is going to be the part which is supposed to be highlighted, right? Also, we have this data key, if you remember, which will decide which key has to be rendered inside of it. So data key, and also a function called onSuggestion click, which will decide what happens when a suggestion is clicked, inside of which we will simply pass this function over here, onSelect. So we're gonna come back to it, but let's just first build this. So instead of this div, I'll take react.fragment over here, just to wrap everything together, because I'm going to be using a list over here, right? So, but before that, I'm going to be doing a map to render all of these suggestions. So I'll say suggestions dot map, and I'll take one single suggestion and the index. Okay. Inside of this, now, first thing that we have to check. So if you can see over here, we have this static data which is rendered just like this, right? There's no key going on over here. So there's no actual use of this data key, right? This is only going to be used if the data contains some sort of object inside of which we have to take out that key. So simply over here, I'm going to say const current suggestion equals, if data key is present, I'm going to take out that data key from the current suggestion, else I'm just going to use that suggestion, right? Simple. So I'll say return, and inside this return, I'll have a list tag, which will say key equals index, or if you have any ID, you can use that ID as well. But after that, I'll have an on click, which will trigger this on suggestion click over here. And on suggestion click will simply take this suggestion, the whole object, right? And below this, I'll have the class name of suggestion item. So I'll go on and style it in just a moment. And inside this list, simply I'm going to render this current suggestion. So let's render this current suggestion, and I'll add that highlighting logic as well over here. So, let's just go on and create that function first. So here I'll say const get highlight or get highlighted text, and this will take the text and what is supposed to be highlighted. So highlight, if you want, you can create it a separate component. I'm just creating a function over here. For now, I'll just return the text, and I'll just take this and I'll just render it over here with the current suggestion and the thing that is supposed to be highlighted, the input that is supposed to be highlighted. So okay, let's just take this and render it right over here. So it will take a few things, which will be first of all data key. I'm going to pass the data key over here, then the highlight, which is going to be our input value simply, then the suggestions, which is going to be the suggestions, and the on suggestion click will be on select, or actually I'll say handle suggestion click. I'll create a separate function over here called const handle suggestion click, and I'm going to provide the on select inside of it, so that we can add a logic if we want to, like logic on top of the on suggestion. So okay, yeah, like this looks good. Let's go back and see. So yeah, you can see this is being rendered. If I remove this, okay, BANA, let's say apple. Yeah, amazing, this is working. Let's just quickly go on and style this first of all. So it's going to be pretty simple. I'll go to styles.css. Since we gave this position relative, I'm going to style this relative to that. So I'll say position absolute, width to be 100%. I'm going to give it some border so that we can see all the suggestions properly. Border top is going to be null because obviously it's going to be rendered over here, right? Some border radius, some box shadow. I'm going to put the Z index to 10 so that it stays on the top. Max height is going to be 150 pixels. Overflow Y is going to be auto because we're going to be adding a scrolling logic over here, right? Margin 0, padding 0, and list styles to be null. Okay, let's see. Sorry, I haven't added this class name right over here inside this UL. So I'll say class name equals suggestions list. So okay, let's go back and see. Okay, this looks good. Let's go on and add the further styles over here. For each and every list item, we gave a class name of suggestion item, right? So I'm just simply going to be giving padding to be 10 pixel and cursor to be pointer. When we hover on them, I'm going to say suggestion item hover, and I'm going to give this background color right here. So let's see. Yeah, this looks awesome. Great. Okay, now let's go on and add that logic of, adding the highlighted text. So inside of this, simply, I'm going to take this text, and what I'll do, I'll split it from wherever the highlight is. So I'm going to take the help of regex over here as well. So const, let's say parts equals text dot split, and inside this I'll say new regex, so regular expression, and inside this simply I'll say first thing that it will take is the highlighted text that we're gonna be using over here. So I'll take the template string, and over here I'll say highlight, and next thing is going to be GI. Now what does this mean? So G over here means global and I means case insensitive. That is, it doesn't matter if it's capital or lowercase letter, it will search it inside of this text right over here, and it will split it from there. So now I'm gonna take this parts and I'll say return, I'll say span, and let me show you actually. Before this, I'll just return the text over here, and I'll say console log this parts. Let me just show you first. So yeah, you can see we have BA as our highlighted text, right? So tomato, basil, and whatever this is. So it's splitting it from this BA. So now it is divided in 3 parts right over here. So now what I'll say return span tag over here. Inside this, I'll say parts dot map. I'll take each and every part and the index, and inside this, I'll simply have a bold tag over here, which will render that particular part. Let's say return, and key is going to be index. But what this will do, it will make the whole text as bold, right? So I'm just gonna check that only render this highlighted text as bold. So I'll say if, or let's just use ternary operator. If the part dot to lowercase is equals to highlight dot to lowercase, only then do this. Else what we will do, we will just render the part. Let's just put this in one bracket as well, and I'll take this return and put it right here, and yeah, this should do it. Let's see. Yeah, great. So if I say BAN, awesome, this is working flawlessly. Now let's just add the logic. So whenever I click on this, it should be added over here and trigger that on select logic, right? So we're already adding this on click over here. So let's go on and add the logic inside this handle suggestion click. So it will receive that particular object. So I'll say suggestion, right? And I'll say set input value to that suggestion, and actually we have to do the same thing over here. So data, if the data key is present, then I'll say suggestion of data key, else I'll just say data key. Then after this, I'll say on select, and we will provide the suggestion object to this on select that we are sending from outside from right over here, this on select. And in the end, I'll say set suggestions to be empty because we have already selected something. Okay, great. Let's go on and see. If I click on this, Amazing. This is selected and you can see the object is rendered right over here. Great. Now we have to optimize this input right over here. See, as you can see, if I say BANA, for on every single keystroke, this is making an API call, right? So this is not what we want. We're gonna implement the debouncing over here. So let's see how debouncing works. So over here, I've opened an Indian e-commerce website called Flipkart. And over here, you can see this has a search box. Now, when I go to this search box and I type, let's say, JavaScript books. Did you notice something? When I typed JavaScript and I paused for a few milliseconds, only then this search results updated. So let me show you once again. So let's say if I say hats. So when I'm continuously typing on the keyboard, it doesn't show me any search results. But as soon as I stop for a few milliseconds, which I guess in this case is 300 or 400 milliseconds, it then makes an API call and fetches all of the search suggestions. So this is what exactly debouncing is. It helps us optimize how we call certain events. So over here, if we were to, let's say, make API call on every single keystroke or every single letter that we type in the search box, it will make a lot of unnecessary API calls to the backend, which will put a lot of pressure on our server. So to avoid all of these issues, we use debouncing. So let me explain this visually what was happening in that search box. So let's say we have a search box which has a debounce method and a delay of 400 milliseconds. And we are typing one word after the other. So we are typing all of these words one after the other. And these has, let's say, a gap of 100 milliseconds between them. So while we are typing this, no API call will be executed. But as soon as we paused and made another keystroke after some times, let's say it is more than 400 milliseconds. Let's say it is around 600 milliseconds. So this is the moment where our action will be performed, which in this case is an API call. So this is what debouncing is. It limits the execution of a function call and waits for a certain amount of time before running it again, which in this case is 400 milliseconds. So now that we've understand debouncing, how are we going to implement it? Now, either we can go on and implement a custom debounce function, a custom use debounce hook, which I've covered in my front-end interview preparation course, link to which you can find in the description down below. Or we can use a library called Lodash. So what I'll do, I'll just open a new terminal and I'll say npm install Lodash. Alright, so Lodash has installed. Let's just close this terminal and I'll import it over here. Import debounce from Lodash/debounce. Okay, let's take this debounce function and right after this get suggestions function, I'll say const get suggestions debounced. And I'll say debounce function and I'll provide it with that get suggestions and a time for, after how much time will it check after the keystrokes have, stopped. So I'll just say 300 milliseconds. And to make sure this does not run every single time, I'll just wrap it using use callback so that this function does not get created every single time on every single render, right? So use callback and I'll just keep this dependency array empty. I'll take this get suggestions debounced and I'll replace it right over here. And this should do it. Let's see, if I just open my network tab and I'll say BANA, and when I've stopped typing, you can see only then the API call is made. Amazing. Now let's see, what are all the features that are remaining over here? We have to implement this keyboard navigation functionality. We have to implement the caching functionality. We have to implement the accessibility, the ARIA tags and all, right? The security, and also some performance feature if there's any, right? So I have implemented all of this advanced stuff in my front-end interview preparation course. This right over here is also good enough to be shown in the interviews. But if you want to truly impress your interviewer, you have to implement those functionality and other advanced features, right? So you can find similar questions like toast component, config-driven form, carousel, and tons of machine coding questions along with performance optimization questions, a whole section on JavaScript interview questions, React.js interview questions, and much more. So you can click the link in the description down below and access that complete front-end interview preparation course right now. It's the only resource that you will ever need to prepare for your front-end interviews.